Academy, and this is the first lesson in this particular series. And today we are going to discuss the sources of Indian history presented by me, Pooja Rawat. Right? So let's quickly see what we are going to study under this. Okay. So the first question arises: why there is a need of sources of Indian history? Why do we study them? Right? So first point is to know your past from different perspective. Okay, be it social, economic, political, you want to reconstruct the ancient Indian history, you need few sources, right? Based on which you will interpret few things, you make your conclusion, and then you'll say, okay, this is the thing that has happened in the past, right? Then second is to weave together data from text, inscription, coins, and other material remains. Okay, so you pick your sources from different categories like the text, inscriptions, coins, and then you try to reconnect the information that you gathered from each and every sources, and then you'll make your conclusion regarding your past, right? The another thing important is to understand the elements of continuity, transition, and change. Okay, what are the things, what are the practices that has still been continued, the things which has transformed now, and there are things which are still being continued. We are practicing these particular things. So to understand those things in detail, we need these sources of history, right? Then these sources can be broadly divided under two categories: the archaeological sources and literary sources. The archaeological sources deals with the material remains or the physical remains, okay, like the coins, inscriptions, monuments, palaces, pottery, forts, right? And then the literary sources, it comprises everything that is under the text, okay, be it indigenous or foreign accounts, it comes under the literary sources, right? Then I've mentioned this that the archaeology speaks where the literature becomes silent. So for a long period of time, we do not have any literary sources. If you compare, the literary sources are only available from the beginning of Vedic age, that is 1500 BC, right? Before that, we do not have any literary account of the ancient Indian history, right? So whatever we know, it is only based upon the archaeological sources. Then let's see first the coins and the importance of coins, right? So the study of coins and currency is known as numismatic. So numismatic is nothing but the study of coins, right? Then the significance of these coins is whenever you look at these coins, it can instantly provide you with the date and the time. Okay, so these a date and time has been mentioned in these coins, and you can instantly know the rule or the time period of the rule. Okay, then these coins provide information regarding the trade, economy, social organization, leadership, military, important events. So these coins contain some symbols, right? And based on these symbols, you interpret things that has been occurred in the past. For example, we have found these ships on the Satvahana coins. Okay, so we can conclude that the maritime trade had played a very important role during the Satvahana period or in the Satvahana economy, right? So third thing is the area of circulation of coins help in estimating the frontiers of empires. So the geographical extent to which these coins are spread, it helps in understanding or estimating the political boundaries of empires, right? Another important thing is it also tell you about the trade that has been going on in the past. For example, the presence of Roman coins in the Indian subcontinent or the Indian provinces, it gives you an information regarding the Indo-Roman trade, right? Since we have found the Roman coins on the Indian land, we can totally conclude that there was some kind of trade that was going on between the India and the Rome, right? So let's move on to the next slide. So there are few terms that you need to be remembered from the prelims point of view and other state exams, right? The first is the Nishka. Nishka is the term that has been used in the later Vedic age. This LTA is the later Vedic age, which extended from 1000 BC to 600 BC. Okay, so this was a kind or the means of exchange during that period. So it is assumed that it was a kind of gold coins, or you can say it was a gold ornaments that they were using as a means of exchange, right? Then we have the punch marked coins. The punch marked coins are the earliest coins that we have found, and it belongs to the Mauryan age and it contains the symbols or the geometrical designs and the symbols of like the plant, sun, mountain, etc. Right? So they do not contain any name or title of the ruler, just only they were only containing the symbols. Then we have Indo-Greeks. Indo-Greek coins, they were the first to issue coins with the name of ruler, its title, dates or effigy. So a proper or the regular coinage, I would say, started with the advent of these Indo-Greeks, right? And they were also the first one to issue gold coin. Okay, so in the history of this India, the Indo-Greeks were the first who issued the gold coin, while the Guptas issued the largest number of gold coins. Remember these points. Let's study the inscriptions. The study of inscription is known as epigraphy. Okay, so epigraphy is the study of inscription. The earliest known inscription belongs to the Harappan period, right? But since the Harappan script is still not deciphered, so the earliest deciphered inscription belongs to the Ashokan period or the Mauryan age, right? Then this inscription helps to understand the language and script of the period, right? So this inscription actually has the information or something has been written in the language and the script. Okay. Third thing is it also helps in understanding the political boundaries of the empire. As we have already discussed with in terms of coins, similarly the inscription or its geographical extent also helped in ascertaining the political boundaries of the empire. Then this inscription holds a very important significance because it contains the information regarding the land grant, donation, the royal orders. Okay, so it gives you a lot of information. Then it also helps in understanding the political and social life. Sometimes social practices have been mentioned in these inscriptions, so you can understand the political and the social life. For example, in the Iran inscription, we have found a mention of sati, right? Then it also gives you information regarding the military achievements of the rulers. Like the Allahabad pillar inscription, it gives you the information regarding the military achievements of Samudragupta, right? These are few inscriptions that you must know. First one is Iran inscription. Why it is important? Because it explains the prevalence of sati. Okay, so there was the sati system during the Gupta age. Okay, then the second inscription is the Allahabad pillar inscription. It was inscribed thrice in the past by Ashoka, then Samudragupta, and then by Jahangir. But it is very important from the Samudragupta point of view because it contains the military achievements of the Samudragupta and it was composed by Harisena, who was the court poet of Samudragupta. Then the another inscription we have Ehol, which tells that the Harshvardhana was defeated by Pulkeshin II, who was the Chalukyan king, and it was composed by the court poet of Pulkeshin II, Ravi Kirti. Right? Let's talk about the literary sources. So the literary sources can be divided into the indigenous and the foreign literature, and the indigenous literature can then subdivided into the religious and secular. Under the religious, we'll divide it into Vedic literature, Buddhist literature, Jaina literature, and the Brahmanical literature. We'll discuss that one by one. So first we'll be discussing the Vedic literature. As the name suggests, it was composed during Vedic age, right? And this age expanded from 1500 BC to 600 BC. Talking of the language, it was composed in the Sanskrit language, and it is believed that Lord Brahma himself revealed this Vedic knowledge to few sages, and these sages then passed on this information to many generations through a well-developed system of oral learning, right? So while we're discussing Vedic literature, we'll be focusing on Vedas, Upavedas and Vedantas. So what are Vedas? Veda derived its name from the word Ved, which means to know or the knowledge. Okay. There's also a term called Shruti, which means to hear, and Smriti, which means to remember. So Vedas actually fall under this Shruti category, right? These are 4 in numbers: Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam Veda and Athar Veda. Rig Veda, as the name suggests, it was composed during the Rigvedic age, which expanded from 1500 BC to 1000 BC, and it is nothing but the collection of the prayers and hymns, and it has 10 mandals, or the 10 books or the section. 8 of these 10 mandals were composed during the Rigvedic age. Then we have Yajur Veda. It contains the rituals for performing sacrifices. Then we have Sam Veda, which is the collection of melodies and the tunes, and the hymns are mostly dedicated to the Som, Indra and Agni. So Som, Indra and Agni were the most important gods during the Vedic age. And the last we have Athar Veda. It contains the magical charms and spells to ward off evils, right? Now these Vedas has 4 integral parts. Okay, the first one is Samhita, which is a collection of hymns, prayers and charms. Okay, then the second part is the Brahmana. It actually explains the meaning of these hymns, their application, okay, and their connection with the sacrificial rites. So few important Brahmanas I've quoted here: the Aitreya Brahmana and the Taittiriya Brahmana. Then there is another Shatpada Brahmana that belongs to the Yajur Veda. Okay, then we have Aranyaka. Aranyaka is the philosophical portion of the Brahmana. Okay, it is composed mainly by the jungle hermits, or by and for the jungle dwelling hermits. So it do not lay much stress on the rites and rituals, right? It mainly focused on the moral virtues. At the last we have Upanishad. This is the crux of Vedic knowledge, and it explains the final aim of these Vedas, and so also known as the Vedanta, right? And it explains the relation of God, soul and matter. A point to be remembered is Satyamev Jayate. This famous quote has been taken from the Mundaka Upanishad. Then we have Upavedas. Upavedas are nothing but the appendix to the Vedas, and each Veda has its own Upaveda, which deals with the secular subjects, right? So I've listed these Upavedas here. The first one is the Ayurveda, which is the Upaveda of Rigveda, and it deals with the science of medicines and plants. Then we have Dhanurveda. This is the Upaveda of Yajur Veda, and it deals with the art of archery and warfare. Then we have Gandharveda, which is the Upaveda of Samveda, and it deals with the art of music and dancing. At the last we have Shilpveda, which is the Upaveda of Earthveda, and it deals with the architecture part, right? At the end we have Vedangas. Vedangas were composed to facilitate the learning of these Vedas, right? They actually serve as a guide to these Vedic texts, rituals and sacrifices. These are 6 in numbers. Okay, the Kalpa, which contains the instructions for the rituals to be performed. Then we have Siksha, which actually deals with the pronunciation of the words or verses that has been used in this Vedic text. Then we have Nirukta, which deals with the etymology or the origin of words. And then we have Vyakran, which is the grammar portion. Then we have Chand, the poetic meter or the rhythm that needs to be followed. Okay, and then we have the Jyotish, which deals with the astrology, and it focused on the time